I saw in reports that, I don't know if we mentioned this earlier, Atlanta really right now is kind of looking at trading everyone outside of Trae Young. So they're looking at all possibilities. They just moved off of John Collins. Now, I know how I feel about this. As a Utah Jazz fan, I'm ecstatic. As an Atlanta Hawks fan, you're probably very disappointed. But when you look at some of the guys that are coming up for extensions, it kind of makes sense. They were able to move off of a 3-year, $78 million deal. They now have $25 million in tax exemption free cap space to use, and they have guys that they're going to need to look at for extensions. DeJounte Murray is coming up. Onyeka Okongwu, Sadiq Bey, and I'm missing one. I know I am. Let me see here. No, Murray, Okongwu, Sadiq Bey. That's right. And then you also have, AJ Griffin, Jalen Johnson, guys like that. You're going to have to pay these guys at some point. So while it's very painful, you really didn't get anything for John Collins because, let's be honest, you didn't get anything. This is why the new CBA is so damning in terms of trying to compete in traditional ways that we are used to seeing. As NBA fans, we've been conditioned since 2008 to believe that you need a big three to compete for a title. The Boston Celtics did it. Miami's done it. Brooklyn has tried to put one together. The Thunder have done it. Golden State has put one together. We as fans just expect that you need 1, 2, 3 superstars on a team to be relevant in terms of title contention. But the realism is those days are over. That's why all of these crazy trades are happening. That's why they had to move off of John Collins. His trade value was basically non-existent. They've been trying to trade him for years now. But what they did do, which was a win, was they freed up the cap space to keep their core roster, the guys they want to keep, and extend them on very good deals. What do you think, JD?
I hate it. I hate it for Atlanta. You're saying that they needed to do it. They needed to do it because they made a mistake these past few years asking too much for Collins. This is, they dug themselves into a ditch. And I like Atlanta. I feel for them, but it's like Rudy Gay and a second round. If anything, it's like you got to say that Rudy Gay was just a consolation prize for the Jazz, that they got to pawn off extra cap space with him. I just am not sold on this at all. It seemed like they were under some crunch, with finances, with the new CBA. They waited too long. We're forgetting that people were offering stuff for John Collins.
That's true.
Multiple times the Utah Jazz tried to get him. They were willing to give Gobert. They were willing to trade Jared Vanderbilt and Malik Beasley. Even Sacramento last year was willing to trade Harrison Barnes and their top 5 pick, which ended up turning into Keegan Murray.
Yeah.
So overall, I think that they dug themselves in a ditch. They had to move off of them because they made the mistake of blowing it over the past few years. And I'm sorry, Atlanta fans. I know that, there is a lot of hope for this. There's a lot of, okay, we have the trade exception. We can maybe go after somebody else. But I think John Collins, he's young and he still has talent. And I think that if you're just going to say, oh, he wasn't as great of an asset, I know that you're still kicking yourself, because I know this guy was beloved in Atlanta and he has upside. He had his wrist hurt or his arm hurt or something like that, and it affected his shooting. He was in trade talks for years. I'm sure that affected his performance. I mean, we're Utah Jazz fans. Mm-hmm. I remember when
we love the trade for us.
Jordan Clarkson won 6th Man of the Year. He was performing at a very high level. The subsequent year, he shot terribly. He was coming off of a wrist injury or a hand injury. He broke his hand or something like that. and he shot terribly that year. He was like 30%, very reminiscent of what John Collins is doing. And then the year after, which was this year, he blew up again. He had his best year ever. He was averaging 20 points per game, shooting fairly efficient, passing the ball. And I think that there's a lot of upside with Collins. I think that, it takes some time to recover from an injury. That could be the reason why he wasn't playing as well, as he's had a little bit of a dip. Could also be the fact, like I had mentioned before, that maybe he was underperforming because he knew that the team didn't want him. So I think that the Hawks kind of botched this one.
I don't disagree with that take, because I agree. The Hawks front office did botch this. I can understand from a business perspective why you still went through with the John Collins trade, but his trade value was tanked by the Atlanta Hawks. It really was. I actually have a friend in Atlanta who I was talking to last year when the Jazz were trying to trade Rudy Gobert for John Collins, and he laughed in my face and said, if you were and I quote, he said, if you were worked in the front office for the Jazz, you would get fired by Ryan Smith immediately for even proposing this, because Rudy Gobert doesn't have the same upside that John Collins does. That is what he said to me verbatim. Here we are, a year later, buddy, you know who you are too, and you owe me a beer for this one, because their front office totally botched it. And the new CBA doesn't play around, and it's not giving anyone outside of the amnesty period time to really take care of their roster. Great pickup for the Jazz, highway robbery, and I know that a lot of Atlanta fans are crying inside, and I don't blame you. But if you look with some sort of silver lining, do remember you moved off of $78 million over the next 3 years, and now you have the luxury of signing some of the guys that you really want to keep moving forward. What do you think of the CP3 trade?
I thought it was a good dump. Dump to Golden State, though. I don't understand why Golden State would even want CP3 other than the fact that he's an expiring contract, which is probably the only reason. There's been a lot of talk about it.
Let's be honest, that is the only reason. With how high they were above the new second apron, they had to do something. And CP3 has $30 million, and then it drops off. This allows them to re-sign a guy like Draymond Green. That's
who
why
might go to the Mavericks, or like you were saying, maybe the Kings.
Or the Kings. I hear Portland has thrown their hat in the ring on that one too. Dame really wants Draymond Green. That's like his dream scenario. And if you're the Portland front office, you got to find a way to make that happen. You pay that man whatever he's asking for. But that's why all these crazy trades are happening. These teams are now afraid of the new second apron, and I don't blame them. It takes away all of the tools you need to essentially build a championship roster. I mean, even the Clippers were shopping Paul George around not too long ago, right before the draft, just gauging interest on what his value was. Mm-hmm. This is the new NBA, which makes these draft picks even more coveted as trade assets, and these young players that you don't have to pay, but you can fill your roster out with.
Mm-hmm. And I think that, with our CBA segment that we did, you showed some teams up on the board. I think that we're going to see some moves from them, just maybe dumping some salary because they're so expensive. Other teams, notable teams are Chicago Bulls, mm-hmm. who, maybe they're going to dump some salaries there. Maybe they're going to do a rebuild like what Washington's doing. So we're just going to have to see. It's going to be a crazy offseason, and it's going to maybe be a crazy upcoming few years with how the CBA is implemented.
Absolutely.
Thank you for watching another episode of the Full Court Press NBA podcast. For the full podcast,